In a quiet suburban neighborhood in California, the Johnson family thought they had everything under control. After a series of minor break-ins nearby, they decided to install a security camera system around their house. It was supposed to be a simple solution to keep their home safe. Mark Johnson, the father, was proud of the sleek black camera mounted just above the front door, its small red light blinking steadily. He reassured his wife, Lisa, and their 2 children that this was just a precaution, nothing more. But from the very first night, something was terribly wrong. That evening, after dinner, Mark sat down at his computer to check the live feed from the camera. The screen showed the front porch, the steps, the empty street beyond. At first, everything looked normal. Then, as the clock struck midnight, something caught his eye, a figure standing motionless at the edge of the porch, just beyond the camera's view. Mark blinked, leaned closer, but the figure did not move. It was a tall silhouette, dark and blurry, like a shadow person. Lisa, curious, came over to look and gasped. "Is that someone outside?" she whispered. But when they looked out the window, the porch was empty. The street was quiet. No cars, no pedestrians. Nothing. Mark rewound the footage to see when this figure first appeared. To their horror, the figure was there the night before, and the night before that. It never moved, never stepped closer or farther, just stood there staring at the door. Panic set in as they scrolled back further. 5 months ago, the figure had already been there every single night, at exactly midnight. The Johnsons had only moved into the house 3 months ago. How was this possible? Who, or what, was standing on their porch before they even lived there? The children began to have nightmares. Their youngest, Emily, claimed she saw the shadow man in her dreams, standing at the foot of her bed, whispering something she couldn't understand. Lisa refused to sleep near the windows and kept the curtains tightly shut. Mark, however, was determined to find a logical explanation. He checked the camera installation date and settings, thinking maybe the footage was old or tampered with. But everything matched perfectly. The time stamps, the camera's internal clock, the file history. It was impossible. One night, unable to resist, Mark stayed up to watch the live feed. At exactly midnight, the figure appeared again. This time, Mark decided to speak to it through the intercom. "Who are you? What do you want?" His voice trembled. The figure did not respond, just stood there, silent, still. Then, suddenly, the red light on the camera flickered violently and went out. The screen went black. For a terrifying moment, Mark was left staring at the dark nothingness on his monitor. When the feed returned, the figure was gone. But when he looked outside again, the porch was ice cold, the air thick with smell like burnt plastic. The next day, Mark showed the footage to his neighbor, Mr. Hughes, an old man with a suspicious stare. After watching, Mr. Hughes paled and said in a low voice, "That's not a person. That's something else. This neighborhood used to have an old asylum, you know? It was shut down decades ago after a fire. They say the souls never left." Mark tried to laugh it off, but inside, a cold dread settled in his chest. That night, the figure returned again. But this time it moved. Slowly, almost painfully, it lifted its head and looked directly into the camera, as if it saw Mark watching. A faint whisper came to the speakers. "You shouldn't have seen this." Then the screen went dark. Mark's heart raced as he realized they were not just watching a shadow. They were being watched back. From that moment on, the Johnson family's life was never the same. The camera caught glimpses of the figure moving closer each night, and strange noises echoed through the empty house. Doors slammed shut by themselves, lights flickered, and at times, cold breaths seemed to brush their necks. And the worst part? When Mark checked the camera again the next morning, the figure was still there, standing silently on the porch, waiting. They had invited darkness into their home. Something ancient, something angry, and it was not going away. After the terrifying encounter caught on camera, the Johnson family's lives descended into a nightmare far worse than any of them could have imagined. The day after Mark saw the figure lift its head and whisper through the static, the family tried to act normal, but none of them could shake the dread that clung to their skin like cold sweat. Lisa refused to leave the curtains open. Every shadow seemed alive, Every creak in the house made Emily and her older brother, Jake, jump. At school, Jake told his friends about the shadowy figure on their porch, but they only laughed, calling it a prank. At night, however, laughter turned to silence as the figure returned. Every single night at midnight, more defined, more real, as if the house itself was breathing with the presence of something unholy. Mark, desperate to find answers, began researching the neighborhood's dark past. The local library's archives revealed that the area had been built on the ruins of a state asylum, closed down after a catastrophic fire in the late 1970s. Witness accounts told of patients who had died trapped inside. Their screams and shadows said to haunt the land. It was a place where sanity was lost, and death came quickly. Many believed the souls of those tormented patients had never left, trapped between this world and the next, unable to move on. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Mark sat glued to the monitor, watching the figure appear again. But this time, it was closer than ever, standing right beneath the porch light, its eyes glowing faintly red. A cold shiver ran down Mark's spine as the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, his breath visible in the air. Lisa's voice broke through the silence, trembling as she whispered, "Mark, it's here." The children huddled in the living room, clutching each other, terrified. Then, without warning, the front door slammed shut with a force that shook the whole house. The lights flickered violently, plunging them into darkness for a moment before the emergency lights blinked on. Mark's heart pounded as he grabbed his phone and called 911. The operator tried to reassure him, but when the police arrived and searched the house and yard, they found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing except the chilling emptiness of the night. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but said they would keep an eye on the neighborhood. Over the next few nights, the activity escalated. The security camera caught the figure moving inside the perimeter of the porch, reaching out with long skeletal fingers, as if trying to grab something just out of reach. The family's phones and electronics malfunctioned constantly. Late one night, Emily screamed from her bedroom, saying she saw a woman in white floating near her window, her face twisted in silent agony. Lisa rushed Emily's room, but found nothing but the cold, empty air. One evening, Mark invited Mr. Hughes, the neighbor, over again. The old man seemed to know more than he let on. After watching the footage, his face grew pale and his voice dropped to a whisper. "This isn't just a ghost. It's something darker. Those who died in that fire. Some didn't just lose their lives. They lost their humanity. What you're seeing is a remnant of that horror, something that feeds on fear and pain. It can't leave until it finds a way to break free." Lisa shivered and asked, "How do we stop it?" Mr. Hughes shook his head slowly. "You don't stop it. You survive it. You protect yourselves and hope it loses interest. But be warned, it learns. It adapts." That night, the Johnsons barricaded themselves inside the house. At midnight, the camera showed the figure standing silently at the door again. Then it did something impossible. The camera feed distorted, flickering wildly, and a chilling voice echoed through the room, low and guttural. "Leave. This is not your home." Suddenly, the front door rattled violently, as if being pushed from the outside. The windows shook. Mark grabbed a baseball bat and stood guard by the door. The children screamed and clung to their mother. After a tense moment, the noise stopped, and the house fell eerily silent again. But the terror was far from over. As they calmed down, Lisa noticed something on the floor near the door, a single black feather, soft and oily to the touch. It was unlike any bird feather they had seen, with a faint shimmer in the moonlight. The family exchanged frightened glances. The next day, Mark discovered that the camera system had recorded a hidden video file, of footage that didn't match their home or neighborhood. It showed a dark figure standing in an old, crumbling asylum hallway, whispering names over and over in a cracked, desperate voice. The last word was release. The Johnsons now understood the depth of the curse tied to their home. They were not just dealing with a haunting, but with an ancient, restless spirit demanding something unknown. And it was growing stronger, more daring, crossing the boundary between the past and present, inching closer with every nightfall. Lisa suggested they seek help from a local priest. Father O'Connor was an old man known for his knowledge of exorcisms and the occult. When Mark contacted him, the priest agreed to visit the house immediately. That evening, Father O'Connor arrived, carrying a worn leather Bible and a small wooden box filled with holy water and relics. He walked silently through the house, his face grave. At midnight, he stood on the porch, facing the spot where the figure always appeared. He began to pray loudly in Latin, sprinkling holy water around the perimeter. The air grew thick, charged with an unseen energy. Suddenly, the shadow figure emerged, its eyes burning brighter than ever. It let out a low, haunting wail that shook the house to its foundations. Father O'Connor held his ground, chanting louder. The figure writhed and twisted. Then with a terrible screech, it vanished, disappearing into a cold gust of wind that slammed the front door shut behind it. For a moment, silence reigned. The family dared to hope the nightmare was over. But as Father O'Connor packed his things to leave, the camera feed flickered one last time. On the screen, the shadow returned, this time standing just inside the doorway, smiling with a mouthful of sharp, broken teeth. It whispered softly, almost kindly, "This is only the beginning." And with that, the screen went black again. The night after Father O'Connor's visit, the Johnson family barely slept. The air in the house was thick with unease, each creak and groan amplified in the silence. Lisa stayed awake most of the night, sitting rigid in the living room with the security monitor glowing in the dim light. Mark was upstairs, pacing his study, and the children had long since retreated to their rooms. But neither Jake nor Emily dared close their eyes. Around midnight, the house seemed to breathe, an unnatural pulse that made every shadow flicker and stretch. On the security monitor, the porch light flickered erratically, and then, just as always, the figure appeared. But this time it was different. Instead of standing motionless, the shadow took a step forward, then another. The outline became clearer, sharper. It wasn't just a shape anymore. It had form, almost human, but wrong in every way. Its limbs were too long, fingers stretched like claws, and its eyes glowed an impossible shade of crimson. Lisa's breath hitched as the figure raised a hand and pointed directly at the camera, and then the screen went dead. Suddenly, every light in the house exploded into darkness. The power had cut out. In the pitch black, a cold wind whipped through the rooms, slamming doors and rattling windows. Lisa screamed, and Mark shouted to the kids to stay calm and stay together. Fumbling, Mark grabbed a flashlight and scanned the hallway, only to find the walls smeared with dark streaks, like dried blood. The smell was sickening, an acrid mix of rot and decay. Jake, wide-eyed and trembling, whispered, "Dad, I think it's inside." They gathered in the living room, locking the door behind them. Lisa called the electric company, but the line was dead. No cell phone reception. The house was completely cut off. Then the whispers began. At first, faint, almost inaudible, but growing louder, echoing off the walls, surrounding them like a swarm. The voices spoke in fractured phrases, repeating over and over, "Release us! Free us! Find her!" Emily clung to her mother, crying softly, while Jake stared at the corner of the room where shadows seemed to writhe and pulse. Mark's jaw clenched. "Who? Find who?" he demanded aloud, but the voices only laughed, a dry, chilling sound like dead leaves scraping over stone. Then the fireplace burst to life, flames roaring with unnatural color, green, purple, black. The heat was suffocating, yet no one dared move. From the fire, a figure emerged, a woman in a tattered white dress, her face hidden beneath a veil of matted hair. She raised her head slowly, revealing hollow, empty eye sockets that seemed to suck the light out of the room. "Help me," she whispered, voice cracking with despair. "I'm trapped." The fire, the pain. Mark swallowed hard, feeling something clawing at the edges of his sanity. "Who are you? What do you want?" The apparition floated closer, the air freezing with her breath. "The asylum. They left me to burn. They silenced me. You live on the ground where my screams still echo." Lisa, voice shaking, asked, "How can we help you? What do you need?" The ghostly woman's hollow eyes seemed to pierce their souls. "Find my name. Find my story. Free me from the lies." Suddenly, The flames vanished, and the house fell silent once more. The power returned. The front door slowly creaked open, as if inviting them to step outside. Mark stepped forward, heart pounding. "We need to go to the asylum. We need to know everything." The children nodded. Fear mingled with a strange sense of purpose. The next day, armed with flashlights and camera, the family drove to the remains of the old asylum, hidden beneath overgrown weeds and rusted iron gates. The building was a rotting carcass of brick and shattered glass, with graffiti scrawled over its walls and the scent of mold-thickened air. Inside, the darkness was absolute, swallowing the beam of their flashlights. As they moved through crumbling hallways, the silence was broken only by the distant drip of water and their cautious footsteps. In one room, they found old patient records scattered and torn. Mark carefully examined the yellow papers, eyes scanning for a name that might belong to the woman from the fire. Suddenly, a cold breath brushed Mark's neck. He spun around, flashlight darting over the peeling walls, but saw nothing. A faint, sorrowful whisper followed him. "Find me before it's too late." Lisa called to the kids, urging them to stay close. The shadows shifted unnaturally, and for a moment, the floor beneath them trembled. Then from a nearby room, a low, guttural growl echoed, an unmistakable warning. Fear surged through their veins, but Mark pressed on, his hands trembling as he uncovered a tattered journal hidden beneath floorboards. The ink was faded but still legible. It belonged to a woman named Eleanor Blackwood, a nurse who worked at the asylum and mysteriously vanished in the fire. The journal described horrific experiments, cruel patients, and a secret lockaway deep beneath the building, the source of the curse that now haunted their home. As they read, the temperature dropped sharply. A scream echoed through the halls, a desperate, blood-curdling cry that sent the children into tears. Lisa clutched the journal tightly, whispering, "We have to end this." Suddenly, the lights of their flashlights flickered and died. They were plunged into total darkness. Panicked, Mark fumbled for his phone's flashlight, but before he could switch it on, an icy hand grasped his wrist. He screamed, struggling against the invisible force, while a voice hissed in his ear, "You cannot save her. You will join us all." In the black void, the last thing Mark saw was a pair of burning eyes, inches from his face. Mark's heart pounded like a hammer as the icy grip tightened around his wrist. The darkness felt alive, pressing in from all sides, suffocating and endless. He tried to pull away, but the unseen force held him fast, dragging him deeper into the abyss that had swallowed the asylum's corridors. His breath came in ragged gasps, cold sweat soaking his skin. Around him, faint whispers churned like a storm of lost souls, murmuring curses and pleas, twisting and turning like shadows without form. Lisa's scream pierced the darkness, a desperate, raw sound that jolted him back to the moment. He wrenched free with a violent tug and stumbled forward, eyes straining to adjust to the feeble glow of his phone's flashlight. The beam revealed the terrified faces of his family. Lisa clutching Emily tightly, Jake standing stiff with fear, but gripping his sister's hand, the fragile thread that kept them together in this nightmare. "We have to get out." Lisa cried, her voice breaking. "Now!" But the asylum had other plans. The ancient building seemed to pulse with malevolence, walls closing in, floors creaking beneath their feet, like a beast breathing. The exit was nowhere in sight. The halls twisted and shifted, every doorway leading them deeper into a maze of decay and despair. Each step echoed with distant screams and tortured laughter, a cacophony of anguish that threatened to shatter their minds. Mark tried to steady his breathing, forcing himself to think clearly. They needed to find the source of the curse, Eleanor Blackwood's secret. Somewhere beneath the asylum was the origin of a nightmare stalking their home. He remembered the journal, its pages trembling in Lisa's hands. Eleanor wrote about a hidden chamber. Mark said, voice low and urgent. She said it was where they kept the worst patients, where the fire started. "Then that's where we go," Lisa whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks. "It's the only way." Together, they pressed on, the flashlight beams cutting through the suffocating darkness. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of smoke and something far worse, decay, sorrow, and old blood. The walls bore strange symbols, scratched deep into the plaster, signs of desperate rituals, warnings, and curses. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them, dust falling from the cracked ceiling. A distant explosion echoed, sending a wave of panic through the family. They stumbled into a wide stairwell, descending into a basement so black it felt like the heart of the earth itself. Here, the air was still, but heavy. The walls were lined with rusted metal bars. Cells that once held screaming inmates. One cell door hung open, swinging slowly like a pendulum, creaking in the silence. Inside, dark stains marred the floor, blackened and sticky like old blood. Jake swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. "Mom, Dad, I think someone's here." Lisa tightened her grip on Emily and shone the flashlight into the cell. For a brief moment, the beam caught a pair of glowing eyes, red and hollow. A guttural growl escaped from the shadows, and something moved, quick and jerking, before vanishing into the darkness. "Run!" Mark shouted, dragging his family forward. But the asylum wasn't done with them. Behind them, chains clattered, doors slammed shut, and the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, impossible to outrun, close and fast. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, screaming in agony. The family burst through a heavy metal door and found themselves in a narrow tunnel. The walls glistened with moisture, the floor slick with something cold and sticky. At the end of the tunnel, a faint light flickered, an old lantern swaying in the air, casting grotesque shadows. Mark's flashlight flickered again, then died completely. In the darkness, Lisa screamed as something cold brushed against her arm, fingernails dragging, slow and deliberate. She could feel a breath on her neck, icy and foul. "Who's there?" she cried, voice trembling. No answer, only the growing sound of whispering voices chanting a broken phrase. "She lies! She lies!" Suddenly, a figure appeared from the shadows, a woman in tattered white, the same ghostly figure from their home, but now closer, clearer. Her veil was torn, revealing a face burned and twisted with pain and rage. Her hollow eyes blazed with an unholy fire. "I am Eleanor," she hissed. "You woke me. Now you belong to the fire." Mark stepped forward, defiant despite the terror. "We're here to end this, to free you." Eleanor laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Free? No one frees the damned. You will burn with me." The ground shook violently, cracks splitting the walls. The lantern blew out, plunging them into blackness. Then came the flames, wild, unstoppable, filling the tunnel with choking smoke and blistering heat. The family stumbled, coughing, desperate to find an escape. The walls closed in, the fire licking at their heels. Mark grabbed Lisa's hand, pulling her along. "Keep moving. Don't look back." Behind them, Eleanor's scream echoed, a banshee wail of fury and sorrow. The fire roared louder, a living thing hungry for souls. Just as their lungs began to burn, a sudden coldness swept over them. The flames vanished, replaced by a chilling silence. They found themselves outside the asylum ruins, the morning sun breaking over the horizon. Breathless, scorched, and trembling, the family collapsed on the ground. The nightmare was over, or so they hoped. But deep within the asylum's shattered walls, a single ember glowed, a faint, pulsing heartbeat that promised the fire would rise again. The sun had barely risen when they returned home, exhausted and traumatized. Their house stood exactly as they left it, quiet, neat, perfectly normal. But the silence felt wrong. The air hung heavy, stale, as though something old had curled into the walls while they were gone and waited. Mark fumbled with his keys, hands trembling, and pushed open the door. The floorboards groaned in greeting. Too loud, too deliberate. Lisa stepped inside with Emily pressed tightly to her, while Jake lingered on the porch, glancing over his shoulder at the neighborhood. The calm of the cul-de-sac felt like a trap now, too perfect, too still. Inside, everything looked untouched. Yet as they moved from room to room, there was a strange sense that nothing was the same. The television turned itself on. The fridge door opened slightly and then closed with a soft click. And when Lisa walked past the hallway mirror, her reflection didn't follow. It just stood there, still unmoving, staring after her. They gathered in the living room. shutting the blinds as if hiding from daylight would protect them. Lisa sat silently, holding her children, while Mark pulled out his laptop and accessed the camera footage. He had set the system to record while they were gone. Maybe, just maybe, they had evidence that whatever they encountered at the asylum had stayed behind. As the footage loaded, the camera showed the empty front yard, the driveway, the porch, and then the figure. It was still there, standing in front of the door, not moving, not blinking, just watching. It hadn't disappeared after the fire, after the confrontation with Eleanor. No, it had never left. But now there were two. Mark's stomach turned. The figure on the left was the same, tall, shadowed, indistinct. But beside it stood another shape, smaller, hunched slightly, with what looked like a veil covering her face. They weren't just shadows anymore. They had substance. And they were facing the camera now, not the house. Then the timestamp changed. The camera jumped back to 5 days before their trip. The figures were there. Then 5 weeks before, they were still there. Then 3 months ago. Same thing. No matter how far back he scrolled, they remained. Except when Mark went back to the oldest footage, 5 months and 1 week ago, something new happened. In the corner of the screen, barely visible, was a shadow inside the house, looking out. A child-sized silhouette. It was standing in the hallway behind the front door. That hallway had always been dark. But the figure was clear. Thin arms, tilted head, watching from inside the house. Mark didn't say anything to the others. Not yet. Instead, he got up, heart pounding, and walked slowly toward the front hallway. It looked normal, empty, but as he neared the spot where the shadow had appeared, he felt it cold, unnatural, like standing in a freezer. The temperature dropped instantly. His breath fogged the air. A faint sound echoed behind him. Whispers. Not from the camera, not from the past. From now. From the walls. And they were saying his name. Mark. Mark. He turned quickly, but nothing was there. That night, they tried to sleep, but none of them could. Lisa kept waking up, gasping as though drowning, whispering Eleanor's name. Jake saw a shape standing at the end of his bed that vanished when he blinked, and Emily kept repeating the same phrase in her sleep over and over again. She's under the house now. Mark didn't know what to do. The fire hadn't stopped it. Going to the asylum had made it worse. They had touched something old and angry, and now it had followed them back. No, not followed. It had always been there. The next morning, Lisa found something horrifying. The basement door was open. It had always been locked. They didn't use it. The previous owner had said the basement was unfinished. Nothing but dirt and mold. But now the door stood wide, the steps descending into pitch black. Mark grabbed a flashlight and descended alone. The basement was freezing. The concrete floor quickly gave way to earth. The walls were crumbling, and something was etched into the ground. Symbols, circles, drawn with black ash and blood. In the center was a single object, an old cracked porcelain doll. Its eyes were closed. Mark knelt slowly. The doll gave him a strange feeling, as if it were alive, breathing. The moment his hand touched it, the lights upstairs flickered. Then he heard footsteps. Above him, moving fast, running. Then a loud, bone-jarring slam as the basement door shut. He ran up the stairs, but the door wouldn't open. He pounded and shouted, but no one answered. The lights failed. He turned back, and in the flashlight's dim circle, he saw it. The doll's eyes were now open, glowing faint red. And then he heard it. A voice, soft and high, coming from behind him. A child's voice. "Let me out." He turned slowly, dread settling in his chest like ice. There was a girl standing in the corner. Pale skin, black hair matted to her face, wearing a scorched dress. Her eyes were wide, mouth trembling. "I'm still down here," she whispered. He backed away, but the stairs cracked beneath him. He slipped, tumbling down into the dirt. When he looked up, the girl was gone. Suddenly, the door at the top creaked open again. Lisa's voice called down. "Mark, are you okay?" He scrambled up and slammed the door behind him, locking it tight. Don't ever go down there, he told her, pale and shaking. There's someone else. Something buried under this house. Lisa didn't argue. That night, they made a decision. They had to leave. The house was cursed. The land, the neighborhood, maybe the whole town. But before they could go, Lisa wanted one last look through the camera archives to see if there was a moment, any moment, where it all started. That's when she saw it. A video from the day they moved in. Lisa walking up the steps, Emily holding her hand, Mark carrying boxes, Jake running across the yard, the camera catching it all, and in the window upstairs, someone already watching them, a woman in white, Eleanor, but worse. The footage glitched for just a second, and when it did, the woman in white looked directly at the camera and smiled. Lisa's scream echoed through the house. She knew what that meant. Eleanor hadn't come from the asylum. She had always been there, waiting. They didn't sleep that night. None of them even tried. After Lisa saw the video of Eleanor standing in their window from the day they moved in, the illusion of safety shattered completely. It wasn't about a haunted asylum anymore. It wasn't even about a cursed camera. It was about their house, their family, and something far older than any of them had imagined. Mark sat in the kitchen, watching the front door through the screen of the laptop. The figures outside hadn't moved, but now there were three. One tall, one small, one bent and draped in something that looked like funeral cloth. They just stood there, still and patient, as if waiting for something or someone. Lisa paced back and forth, phone in hand, but the signal was dead. Jake and Emily stayed huddled on the couch, eyes wide and silent. It was only then, in that paralyzed quiet, that Emily finally whispered something none of them expected. They told me they're under the house. Lisa froze. Who told you that, baby? Emily looked up slowly. The girl with the cracked face. She talks to me when I sleep. She says they buried her in the dark, but she's still dreaming, and now she wants to wake up. Lisa knelt down, trembling. What does she mean, wake up? Emily didn't answer. She just pointed toward the basement door. Mark stood up slowly. He'd locked that door after the last time, nailed it shut, even, but the moment he touched the handle, the air around it felt warm, too warm. Then came the noise, a hum, low and vibrating, like something deep underground had begun to move. The house trembled slightly. Lights flickered. In the reflection of the hallway mirror, they weren't alone anymore. Their reflection stood still, even as they moved. Lisa's reflection smiled, though her face in reality was pale and tight with fear. Jake's reflection blinked twice. He hadn't. Emily's opened her mouth wide in a silent scream. Mark didn't dare look at his own. They all turned toward the mirror, slowly, carefully, but before they could move closer, the house shook again. From beneath the floorboards came a sound, soft at first, like breathing. Then came the scratching, from inside the walls, from under the stairs, and then the knocking. 3 knocks, deliberate, rhythmic, from the inside of the basement door. We have to go, Lisa whispered. Now. We take the kids, we get in the car, we leave everything. The front door opened, not slammed, not burst, just opened, by itself. The wind didn't move the curtains. The air stayed still. And standing just outside, no longer captured by cameras but visible to their eyes, was a tall man. No face, no eyes, his head tilted slightly, as if curious. Then he stepped in. Lisa grabbed Emily and screamed for Jake to run. Mark backed toward the kitchen drawer and grabbed a heavy knife, useless but something, anything. As they turned to run through the back door also opened. The bent woman stood there, veil now lifted. Her face was burned, blackened, eyes missing, and she smiled at them. She's ready, the woman rasped. You're the final gift. Then came the voices, not from outside, from inside their own heads. Let me in, let me in, let me in. It repeated over and over, a chant, a command, a plea. Emily began to cry, but Lisa held her tight, whispering her name over and over. Jake stood frozen, tears rolling down his face, whispering. I see them. They're in the walls. Mark made a decision. He ran to the basement. If this thing wanted to be let in, if it was under the house, then that's where he had to go. He had to end it, not run from it. The basement door was already ajar. The darkness beneath it wasn't normal. It felt like ink, like a hole in the world. He stepped down slowly. The stairs groaned, warped from moisture. The doll was gone, but the symbols on the floor were glowing faintly red now, pulsing like veins. In the center stood a girl, the one Emily had described. The cracked porcelain skin, the torn dress, her eyes empty black pools. "You brought me home," she said softly, almost kindly. "Now you have to see." Then the earth opened, not literally, not with fire or an explosion, but in a way the mind couldn't comprehend. Mark found himself no longer in a basement, but in a room of stone and ash. The walls were covered in symbols, hundreds, thousands, like eyes staring at him. Chains hung from the ceiling, and in the center was a chair. And in that chair, bound by rusted cuffs, was Eleanor Blackwood. Her face was peaceful, her eyes closed, but her lips moved. "This house was built on me," she whispered. "My blood, my curse. They tried to hide me, but roots grow through rot." Her eyes opened. "And now, through you, I will become the house itself." Mark felt pain shoot through his chest. He screamed and fell to ground, clutching his heart. He saw flashes, images that weren't his. Families of decades, each cursed, each hunted, each ending in fire or madness. The camera had never been a tool. It had been a doorway, a way for her to see, to watch, to reach. And now, she didn't need it anymore. Upstairs, Lisa screamed as the figures entered. The tall man dragged his limbs across the ceiling, impossibly fast. The veiled woman passed through walls like smoke. The reflections in the mirror stepped out, becoming real. Jake was pulled into the hallway by invisible hands. Emily clung to Lisa, both of them surrounded. But then came the light. From beneath the floor, a pulse, bright and searing. The house shook, and a voice roared, not Eleanor's, but Mark's. "You will not have them." Mark stood in the center of the ritual circle, now burning with white fire. He had driven a knife into his own palm, blood soaking the ground. The girl was gone. The chair was gone. But Eleanor stood before him now, full and real, her face shifting between beauty and decay. "You cannot stop this," she hissed. "I was born of suffering. I live in every house built on secrets." Mark screamed as the fire consumed the walls around them, then burned with them, and he dragged her into the light. Upstairs, Lisa watched as the air shimmered. The figures screamed, and one by one, they dissolved into ash. The mirrors cracked. The cameras shorted out. The floor shook violently. And then silence. Mark never came back up. They found his body hours later, after the fire trucks arrived. The basement had collapsed, sealing whatever ritual space had been there. The authorities ruled it a gas leak. The footage from the security system was corrupted, completely unreadable. But Lisa remembered. Jake remembered. And Emily drew pictures of the girl in her notebook for months after, smiling, always smiling. They moved out, far away, a new state, a new life. But even years later, sometimes Lisa would wake up in the middle of the night and swear she heard knocking. 3 slow knocks, always at 3:33 a.m. One night, Emily came to her room, holding her old doll. She whispered, "Mom, the girl says thank you." Lisa held her tight, praying it was over. But in her heart, she knew curses don't die. They wait, in shadows, in walls, and sometimes in a reflection that doesn't blink back.